Hey everyone, my name is Pat from Recommendable, and I'm going to jump in right away and tell you the clickbait title is exactly that, clickbait. I loved Dune. It is a 10 out of 10, near perfect movie. I've seen it twice, once in IMAX, once on HBO Max. Highly recommend you see it in IMAX if you haven't already. It is absolutely worth it. The the sound, the visuals are absolutely fantastic on the biggest screen you can see it in, so do go see it in IMAX. We're going to jump right in and talk about what I liked about the movie, some interesting tidbits from the books that they left out or put in, and then some things that I thought could have been a little better, small complaints, nothing big. And then I'm going to talk about the one thing that I think I was very disappointed in when it comes to Dune 2021. So stay tuned.
It's time.
All right, so we've got three categories of good things I really, really, absolutely love about this film. First one is the way it's set up, its premise, especially for folks who have not read the book. The first scene with Chani narrating the Harkonnens leaving Arrakis, fantastic. The talk about politics, all these scenes taking place in the first hour or so. Duke Leto talking to Paul among the gravestones, the Benny Gesserit Jessica chat on the landing pad, which was added for the film, and the Harkonnen scene as well. You get a clear picture of the players in the conflict, generally speaking, what they want and what's being set up. And if you read between the lines, and Oscar Isaac's acting is very subtle, but you can clearly see that the Duke Leto knows he's walking into a trap and is doing his best to spring it. And so I love the way that's done. I love all the setup for those scenes. They're done fantastic. You don't have to have read the book to get what's happening. And if you're just a layman, you can, generally speaking, understand the plot of the film. The other part of the kind of setup that I really, really love is kind of introducing how the world works so far as the technology and the environment. So the first point here is the fight between Gurney and Paul early on. It's a training exercise. It's lifted from the book, but it's fantastically done because it shows exactly how the shield technology in the film works. And in almost every fight, with the exception of the last one, there's some sort of shield technology and some sort of projectile or sword fighting through that. So you know instinctively when the shield's turning red, what's happening, and when the ships are exploding, you can see kind of their shields start to disintegrate, and as the projectile pushes through. I thought it was a fantastic way to set up that part of the movie. Made it very clear. Just absolutely, absolutely well done. Special effects, fantastic. And the second part of that is the harvester as well. The scene where the sandworm swallows the harvester. It's your first look at a sandworm proper. It's your first look at how harvesting spice works. It's your first look at kind of Paul's exposure to the spice and, generally speaking, how that works as well. So it's a really good scene that sets up for the rest of the movie when Paul and Jessica are on their own after the ambush, after the Harkonnens attack. And that scene prepares you for every other scene in the desert. It's fantastic. The setup for this film, all of these scenes take place within the first hour of the film, and they all set up perfectly for the next hour and a half. So second, just kind of general thing I loved about the film, and this is especially noticeable in IMAX, and that is just the sense of scale you get. There's one scene in particular early on. One of the Highliners, you see the ship come out of the Highliner. It's a small dot. And then when the ship lands, you see the scope of it next to some hills/mountains and next to some people on the ground. And so that scaling that Denis Villeneuve does from a giant Highlander with this tiny dot to that dot becoming this giant ship next to all these people on the landing pad, that was brilliant. And they do it again when the Atreides arrive on Arrakis. They do it again. There's another Highliner. You see all these tiny ships, poking out from it. and then you cut them on the planet and they're, gigantic. And it's just so well done to show the scope of these ships and the scope of the world. Absolutely, absolutely fantastic. The worms as well were done incredibly. It was very easy to make them corny. In fact, you can see a couple times they cut away before they show a worm completely surface, just to try and make it a little less corny. And one thing they do really well is the worms come directly up and kind of swallow things almost like a whirlpool from the ground. I think that effect is fantastic and just really well done. When a worm swallows a harvester whole, or when it's chasing you through the sand, with the wave, you really get a sense of dread with the worm coming towards you. And when the sand starts to vibrate around you and you start to sink in it, there's a real sense of dread there, like you need to run. Fantastic, brilliantly done, love it. I already mentioned the shield, the effects for the shields. Those again were fantastic. The other thing I'll mention is the sound effects for the voice was excellent. Love the scene where he meets the Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother, and you don't even see Paul walk over. He just, in his mind, he teleports over to her when she uses the voice. But whatever effect they used for that was fantastic. Really, really well done. And again, another scene they set up early in the movie with Jessica and Paul, and then the Reverend Mother and Paul as well. So, all right, last major kind of this is a thing I loved about the film is just the cast in general and the acting. This cast is stacked. There's so many good actors to mention, so I'm not going to mention everyone. The expected folks, Oscar Isaac, Brolin, Javier Bardem, all fantastic. I all expected them to be fantastic. But two standouts for me, Jason Momoa as Duncan Idaho, I thought really, really blew me away. He felt like Duncan Idaho to me. And I'm very much hoping we get to see Dune Messiah now with Jason Momoa in that role. He'd be fantastic. The second actor who I wasn't expecting to be as good as they were was Sharon Duncan Brewster, who played Liet Kynes. She was the character was gender swapped. It was a man in the books. It's a woman in the movie. No problem on my end for that. Relatively minor character so far as the saga goes, but she was excellent, and her character arc from someone who knows what's about to happen, who sees how decent the Atreides are, and who wants to help but ultimately can't, at least initially. Fantastic. I loved her death scene more in the movie than I did the book. Going out her own way. I thought that was fantastic. So another actor that really, really blew me away. And then I'm probably going to butcher this name, Bob's Olosan McKinn. Apologies if I butchered that name. He plays Jamis, and he got a lot more screen time than I thought he would. He was great as well, and they even have scenes and flashbacks to where possible futures where him and Paul could have been friends. He could have been a mentor to Paul, and I really, really love that they put those scenes in the film so that it's clear that there's a relative tragedy when the final scene comes and Jamis and Paul have to fight it out. But a terrific actor, very well done to him. Someone I haven't really seen anything of before this. So, last person I'll mention is Rebecca Ferguson. I'm a huge fan of hers from the Mission Impossible franchise, and lots of other things as well. But specifically, I know her from Mission Impossible. She performed very well. I thought the character of Lady Jessica showed a little more emotion than I expected her to. I always read the character as very stoic, in that we got her emotions as, an inner monologue. But I guess in the film, it's hard to do that. So I'm perfectly fine with her showing more emotion. And Rebecca Ferguson really blew it out of the water. She was fantastic as well. All right, moving on to not complaints, but just some interesting tidbits about the film, especially if you're a book reader, that I was a little bit surprised about. First point of note here is no Fade or Irulan here, or the Emperor himself. I kind of expected them to be cast and possibly have, small scenes in the film. But they're obviously going to save them for film two. So we'll see who gets cast as those characters. But something I thought was interesting, I thought maybe we might see them in the film, especially the Emperor and Irulan. I thought um, they might have been good additions to the politics, but turns out not needed. Politics was handled perfectly fine. The weirdest thing for me, and tell me in the comments if anyone figures out what this is. At some point in the film, there's a weird spider human thing in the film, strongly implied that it can hear and understand English and is sent away using the voice. I don't know what that is. My only working theory is that it's either a Telexu creation, which maybe, will be introduced later on in a Dune Messiah book, or it's Yu's wife, and they just kind of wanted to throw that in there as a disgusting tidbit. But I was dumbfounded when I saw it. It was disturbing. I don't know whether it's eating out of that bowl or milking something into the bowl. It definitely has human hands. I've seen some screenshots of it. I don't know what to think. It was bizarre, but interesting, and I hope Dennis Villeneuve tells us what that is, because I do want to know. A couple other things. We didn't see any Spice Navigators proper. I thought we might on the Highliners get to view them in their tanks or helmets, and kind of get to see how strange they are. But and then the other thing is, during the attack or after the attack, we really follow Paul and Jessica and don't really look back. So we don't get to see Hyatt or Gurney, what happens to them. Their fates are really left unanswered. Obviously, if you've read the books, you know what happens to both of those characters. Uh, Definitely it's something for book two, but interesting that we didn't get to kind of follow those characters throughout the second half of the film with the Harkonnens and what they were doing. So another thing that really was kind of left out, I think, was the explanation of what a mentat is and what they do. Neither of the mentats in the film really were explained. You saw them working, but it wasn't really explained what they were doing or how they were able to do what they do or what their function was. And Paul himself is a mentat in the book. They really completely left that out. I don't think they mentioned at all that he was trained as a mentat, even one bit. So I thought that was surprising. 'Cause in the book, that's relatively important part of his character. Maybe they'll explain it in part two, and kind of didn't want to go too much into it. And then the last thing I thought was super interesting was the first shot of the film, even before the logos, I believe, was a voice and then a translation. Dreams are messages from the deep. So it's not in the book so far as I can find. Would be amazing if this was Leto the Second talking from the future or something like that. But I think it might just be a kind of nod to the themes of the film, of Paul's visions and kind of the possibilities of the paths he can walk. But thought that was an interesting way to start the movie. Didn't really expect anything like that. So, all right, moving on to some small. Remember, I love the film. Some small complaints here. Complaints might even be the wrong word. Just some things that I thought maybe could have been done a little better. So, first one is dealing with the jihad itself. We do get a couple of interesting scenes with Paul kind of, talking about the jihad, and you get a couple of flash forwards in one of the visions, but a lot of the visions themselves focus on Shani. And I would have liked to mix that up. I think we got about 100 shots of Shani, turning and looking at Paul in a vision. I would have loved to have seen a lot more visions, and I assume this will come in part two of this kind of jihad that the Fremen are sent on after book one. Just to give more scope to what Paul is thinking about. When he makes the choice at the end of the film to go with the Fremen, it would have made the choice a lot more, I think, to the layman who haven't read the books, a lot more nuanced of a choice. So would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that. No dinner scene in the movie, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I love the dinner scene. but the dinner scene revolves around a lot of intrigue that doesn't really happen in this film. Who the traitor is doesn't really matter. There's no suspicion put on Duncan Idaho or anything like that. And I think that would have taken time away from the film. And they needed that time, as I mentioned earlier, to set up the premise, to make sure that people who haven't read the book understand what's happening very, very clearly. And so I'm perfectly fine that they sacrificed that scene, but it is a fantastic scene, especially to read. Would have been very hard to do on film, so perfectly fine with that not being there. The last two things here are small complaints. There are a couple of info dumps outside of kind of the, characters meeting each other and talking about the politics. There's a couple scenes where Paul listens to an educational slideshow of the world, telling him some facts about the world, and it's clearly for the viewer to listen to. I'm perfectly fine with that. Like I said, Dune is very complex, and I believe there's only two of those, so considering how complex Dune is, I think that was perfectly fine. But just something that, it's always hard to appreciate those scenes in movies. And then one thing that was IMAX specific is two of, I think, the most important speeches in the film were really hard to hear over the music and sound effects. The first one was Jessica's litany against fear while Paul was taking his test with the Reverend Mother. Very hard to hear her say the words in the IMAX theater. And then the second one, which is more important, perhaps in my opinion, was when they're in this still tent, Paul and Jessica, and Paul has his vision with the jihad and uses those quotes directly from the book. It was very hard because he was speaking so low and the music was so loud to hear exactly what he was saying. So I could understand if people were confused by that scene, and it's very important to the decision Paul makes at the end of the film. So I would have loved to have seen that cleared up a little bit. When I watched it on HBO Max, there wasn't a problem. I could hear it a lot better, but IMAX specifically, that was a problem. Okay, so that's my review of Dune, and I have one more thing to say about Dune, and that is the one thing they got wrong with Dune. And it's quite simply this. They didn't film them back to back, and they needed to. Now, between me writing this video and filming it, they have announced Dune 2, and they've announced it for October 2023, I believe. So that's just 2 years away. However, 2 years to film, produce, edit the second film, that's pushing it. So either they lied to us and they knew they were going to make a second one, or I suspect this film will get delayed even further. And I think the main issue is there's a selfish part of it. I want to see the film as soon as possible, obviously. But I think the main thing, especially for non-book readers, for laymen who were interested in the first film, is so long will have passed between the part one and part two that this, I think it's going to be definitely be a film that you need to see part one again. And I don't know how many casual film goers are going to want to see that. And I hope they don't lose interest. I hope they go see part two. It's a blockbuster, makes tons of money, and then they make a Dune Messiah. That'd be fantastic. But my fear is that if you're a layman and you're just an average moviegoer, by the time Dune 2 comes around, you just will have lost interest and, not be particularly into it. And if they had set these movies 6 months, even a year apart, have them both done, have them both confirmed, I think people would be more brought in, more like Lord of the Rings, where people knew next year the second film and then the third film would be out. They were expected, they were anticipated, excitement grew for the film. I remember being a part of that in the early 2000s. It was fantastic. And I really feel like Warner Brothers missed a trick here with not having faith in Denis Villeneuve to deliver both parts, and having faith in the fans to show up in the theaters and HBO to watch the film. So that's really my big issue with Dune. It's nothing the filmmakers did. It's nothing the director did. It's nothing the actors did. I wish Warner Brothers had faith and had just thrown the money at Denis Villeneuve to make both parts. So, but good news is we do have Dune 2 confirmed for October 2023. So 2 years from when I'm filming this, I hope very much to be sitting in the theaters with you watching part two. Comment down below if your thoughts, if you have any idea what the spider thing is, if you have any comments on what you liked or did not like about the movie, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.